Okie doke. Welcome to another episode of Going South. I am so fortunate today to be talking to Alma Salazar Young. She is the former director of the C.A.M.P program, which is College Assistance to College Assistance Migrant Program. Sorry. She did that as a director both at ABAC up in Tifton and at Valdosta State University. It's a federally funded program, and Alma, jump in if I get any of this wrong. That I think is 1 year. VSU was the only school to have it as a 4-year school. Is that fair to say? Most are at 2-year school, but it's a way to assist the children and families of migrant folks and seasonal workers as they try to go to college. In many cases are first generation. And as a first generation college student myself, my dad had a GED. And there was just a lot I didn't know when I started college. And that's one of the reasons I kept dropping out and going back. So this kind of program provides a variety of resources and support to folks as they enter kind of a world that is just really, really strange if you didn't grow up in it or if your parents didn't go to college. So in addition to doing that, my understanding is you went to Southern?
Yes, I went to
Southern? Yeah.
went to go to Southern University.
And currently Alma is working with the United Farm Workers, an organization started by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. They were part and parcel of the civil rights movement, really working to draw attention to the folks that feed us and make sure that we have food, in addition to folks being treated right, paid fairly, working in safe conditions. So that organization spawned out of that movement back in the day. So I think we got a lot to talk about. Alma, thank you for being willing to talk with me, and it's nice to meet you. So maybe we just start kind of with C.A.M.P. Now, I was reading about it. Did you go through C.A.M.P?
Yes.
Okay, can we just talk about that a little bit then?
Yes. Well, let's see. Let me start from my time arriving to Georgia. So I came to Georgia at the age of 16. My parents, after my parents married, my stepdad, he was an agricultural worker, and he was a migrant worker. He moved to different states, and he came to Georgia to work for a summer. And my mom was like, hey, you can come visit when you finish school, because my mom came as well. We stayed behind in Texas with my aunt. And my mom was like trying to sell it to us. It's like, oh yes, we have this really nice trailer, and it's so beautiful here. There's trees, because we didn't have that in the city of Brownsville.
Okay.
So anyway, so she was like, okay, so we can bring you here on bus, and you're gonna love it. And it's only for the summer. So many 20 years later, I'm still here.
I got you.
So anyway, so I worked.
So this is kind of home by now.
Yes, definitely. I consider Georgia my home.
Yeah.
So we worked in the fields. Summer came and went, and then.
Did you work in the fields?
Yes.
Yeah. What did you do? Because I picked tobacco or crop tobacco as a kid, briefly.
We tried. My mom took us to do that, and my mom was like, "Just watch first. If you want to do it, you can." And I just remember seeing a bunch of men just going in. And about 30 minutes later, somebody came back, like they were dragging him because he was like passing out from, the tobacco just seeping into his skin. And we were like, yeah, we're just gonna go home now. But we lived in Lyons, Georgia, which is like right next to Vidalia.
Okay.
So most of the work we did in the onions.
Okay.
And when there wasn't any work in the onions, we worked on different things like cucumbers. What is the yellow ones?
Squash?
Squash, yes, squash.
It's fair to say Vidalia onions get shipped all over the
Yes,
country. They're famous, right?
yes. During onion season, we just constantly smell like onions because we couldn't get rid of the smell. Even the city, like I remember going back after I left during onion season and going to Walmart, which is nowhere near a onion farm. And I just remember it's in the air. It smells like
Gotcha.
sour cream and onions potato chips.
Oh, really?
That's exactly what it smells like. The entire city, the entire town. But anyway, so that's how I got my agricultural work background, which allowed me to qualify for camp.
Okay.
So not too long after arriving though to Georgia, I made some friends, and I never had really like any friends at that point. So I remember, they asked me to go bowling, and I begged my mom to let me go. I was like, Mom, I don't have any friends. We're so far away from home, and we haven't done anything since we got here. And she would not say yes, but then she finally agreed. So we went bowling with some friends. At this point, I was still trying to learn English. Like, I don't even know how they embraced me, because we couldn't really communicate that well. But anyway, we went bowling. It was a Saturday morning, and I just remember walking out of the building, looking at the parking lot. I can kind of sort of remember laying on a stretcher and seeing cars pass by as like water was dripping on my face because it was raining, and then waking up in the hospital and asking my mom how she got there. And so what happened was, because it started raining really hard after we left, so I think we just kind of went off the road and we hit a tree.
Wow.
And so I hit my head. I don't know what happened, but for whatever reason, I didn't have a seatbelt anymore. So I had some traumatic brain injuries. And at that point, when I went back to school, it was, I could barely write my name. Everything else, I was just, looking at a, algebra class. I didn't do anything because
How old were you?
I was 16.
Okay.
So I tried to make it through school for a bit longer, but it was difficult, because I was still trying to learn the language. And to be honest, I mean, I don't think the teachers cared that much. And because, most Latinos at that point, it's not like that anymore, but most of them just dropped out and just went to work. So I think that was the expectation for me. So my younger brother actually went to college first. He went through a migrant summer camp that they still have through the migrant education program that we have all over the state. And anyway, so he went through that camp program, summer camp program at ABAC. And that's how he found out about camp, and he enrolled in camp. And I think it was in the second semester at ABAC when he called me and he said, hey, there's a program here where you can get your GED. It's called HEP, it's High School Equivalency Program. And I was like, well, yeah, I don't know, because I don't remember anything. I don't remember any of the information that we had or that I learned in school. So I was just trying to make excuses. And a few days later, he called me again. He's like, hey, you really need to try it. Somebody's going to call you and talk to you. Is that okay? And I was like, okay, whatever. So that's how he connected me with them. And I remember they drove to Lyons to the library for me to take an entrance exam. And I was already like, I'm not going to pass it. I think at that point, you only needed a fourth grade level of English and math
Wow.
to be enrolled in the program.
So
And
it wasn't bilingual, it was in English.
no, I did it in English at that point. So I was like, okay, I passed it. They're like, yeah, you can come and move in the dorms. So
This is at ABAC?
at ABAC, yes. So I moved.
Well, and ABAC is Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College. Yeah.
Yeah, so I moved to ABAC in February, and it was an awesome experience. I definitely credit the high school equivalency program and just the way that it's built for me to just develop that interest in college. Because, we stayed in the dorms, we went to the cafeteria, we took classes around campus. So, we will switch from building to building to get to our different classes. So that's something that I found very interesting, and just having that experience.
That had to be kind of huge, though, from going from the onion fields, probably living in a small space with your family or other folks, right? And then going to a regional college.
I was terrified when I first got there. I was already making excuses. I was like, if this doesn't work out, I'm just gonna go home.
You can always go home, right?
Yes. And I was like, I don't know if I like it here. I think my dog misses me. And I was just trying to figure out different things to just pack up and go home. But what at the end of the first week, I took a practice test for the GED. And uh, through that practice test, it showed that I was ready for pretty much 4 out of the 5 subjects for the GED. So they said, hey, do you want to try it? Do you want to try to take the test? And I said, sure, let's do it. So after 1 week of being there, taking classes, I passed 4 sections of the GED. So I passed English, science, social studies. I think actually might have been 4 sections. But anyway, math was the only one that I didn't pass. So the program is 3 months long. So I stayed there for another 3 months. And then I took it again. And by then I barely passed it. Like if you see my scores, I met just the right score
Yeah,
to make it through. And I was like, hey, I'm good.
I'll
So
take
I
it.
got my GED and I said, you know what? I maybe I can do this. Maybe I can get into the program. So I applied as soon as I finished. I think it was at the end of May. And I said, okay, this is perfect. So I'm going to get all my documents together. I'm going to apply for camp and maybe they'll accept me for the fall. And I remember calling them every day. Hey, do you get this documentation? Do you get my
Yeah.
application? Do you get? And at one point, the new director, his name is Javier Gonzalez. He called. When I called, he said, "Yes, yes, you're accepted."
Nice. That had to be exciting.
Yeah, so I went through the program myself, and at that point, I was a non-traditional student. So even though I wasn't the
How
same.
are you? How old are you here? Well, what are we talking?
I was 21.
Okay.
So I was 21, but I was starting, with 17, 18-year-olds going through the program. And, stayed in the dorms, camp paid for that. They paid for the books, everything that we needed, deodorant, whatever. The program paid for it. The academic advisor, at that point, she was also new in the program. So she was definitely helpful. She was extremely helpful, but we got away with way too much.
I gotcha.
So, which I know that allowed me to really do a really good job in my role of camp director because I've been through it. I was a camp student once. I was non-traditional, but it was still a new experience for me as an 18-year-old.
Can you tell folks kind of why that was so important to have that support system?
Well, obviously my parents, my mom, I think she finished 5th grade in Mexico. My dad couldn't read or write. He could only sign his name. My brother went through his first year of college, but he was still, he didn't really get as much assistance from either our parents or the staff because they were going through some transitions, which, now directing a program, I know that transitions of staff really affects the students as well. Any changes that happen during this academic year, it really affects how the students, how they learn and how they really connect to the staff, which is a big part of camp. But anyway, so he was still not really much help for me. But being a migrant student, first of all, we already come with so many. I don't know if you hear my beeps. I see
Yeah,
things.
yeah, it's okay.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Um, so being a first generation college student, being a migrant student on top of that, that's an additional challenge. Being Latino, being bilingual, being low income, all of that adds up. We are really the students with the most challenges out of any student in any college campus. And just having just somebody that we can ask questions, that's already a lot of help. But if we can relate to them, if they look like us, that's something that would definitely help us, develop those relationships and really come out and ask the questions that we have. So there's so many benefits of it,
Yeah,
but yeah,
it sounds like community. Like,
definitely,
Yeah,
definitely.
well, it's also kind of interesting because this is why your folks came here, right? To basically give you a better life. It's kind of the American story in a way, or the American myth, right? About opportunity, and so on. So what was I mean, is your role as the director, you basically facilitated that same process at ABAC and VSU. And were those programs the same or were they different in any way?
Oh no, they were different. Um, at ABAC was the first program in the state of Georgia, a CAMP program in the state of Georgia. And that program, by the time I left, had been there for about 15 years.
Yeah.
And I was part of.
That kind of makes sense though, right? Given it's an agricultural college, right?
Yes, and at that point, I mean, I was a student during the first funding year or cohort. I think I came through the program in the third year. So the program had only been in place for 3 years
Okay.
by the time I became a camp student. And I mean, the interesting thing about camp programs is that, right now we have, I can't remember, 52 or 53 camp programs across the country. And even though we provide the same services, scholarships, academic support, financial support, community, all these different things, the services depend on the university resources and, the university support. So for example, and I always throw this out there because, Michigan State, they do have one of the best programs. And so Michigan State is, obviously, a really well-known, prestigious university. And the university matches what they get from the federal government.
Wow.
So they have a ton of money to spend it. The university already has a lot of resources.
Right.
So that's the reason why, that was really, one of the model programs for a while. They probably still are. I haven't kept up with them, but yeah. So all the universities across the country, we all get the exact same amount of money from the federal government. It just depends on what the university does.
Well, and
So,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
Well, it's also fair to say that immigrant folks aren't just agricultural workers too. It seems to me that it would depend on where the program was. That would kind of shape some of the needs that students would have. Is that fair to say?
Yes, definitely. And yeah, so you build the program depending on the need of your students and what the university could provide. And at Michigan State right now is the only program that recruits students from all over the country. But mostly Florida, Texas, those programs that are heavily Latino populated or migrant populated. So yes, and that university could really provide anything, any sort of support that any migrant student could ever need. So anyway, so at ABAC, it's a smaller college, very limited resources in the university, very limited support, just for any student, period, not just migrant students. So this is where the CAMP program sort of picks it up and provides those additional resources, or develops those additional programs. So going to VSU, my transition to VSU, obviously, 4-year university, comprehensive university. It was for me perfect because it had already a lot of the services that I would have provided, with CAMP funds. But because the university already had those services, I could use the funds elsewhere. So, and develop additional things. So both programs were very different for that reason, mostly because the university VSU already had a lot of services that VSU didn't have. But also I had additional funds that I saved to implement new programs and new activities for the students.
Gotcha. It's interesting because I think of all the racial justice work I've done in the South, and migrant folks and immigrants are generally invisible in all of that.
Yeah.
And we don't really, the only time we talk about immigration is usually when it's a political debate conservatives generally want walls, right? Liberals tend to be more policy driven, not always, right? But I find it's always scared me because I know around me, and when I get in my car and I drive during certain parts of the year, I see folks picking my food and your food. And I wonder what kind of conditions they're working in. I wonder if they're being treated fairly. I wonder, and if they're undocumented by any chance, right? I know they have no rights. They're, if they are being untreated fairly, if they're being, exposed to hazardous chemicals, if they're not being paid, they have nowhere to turn. So I guess, I mean, is it fair to say that this group of folks are kind of overlooked in the racial discussion sometimes?
Oh yes, all the time. Because one, we don't complain. Our parents teach us to, just keep your head down, make yourself invisible, and just, don't make yourself a target, don't attract attention to yourself. And, maybe if you work hard, things will, people will notice and it will pay off. But most of the time it's just stay out of trouble. But even if we have a legal status, if we're citizens of the US, um, even then we still don't want to, attract any attention to ourselves because they might affect our parents, and they could be deported. So yes, I mean, we're invisible for a reason. And at times it's mostly from our own doing.
But
Because
that makes sense that they would say that, though, right? I mean, well, actually, you said it, right? They don't want people to be a target,
yes,
which suggests somebody's shooting it. You know what I mean? Like
yes,
that, or looking for
yes,
something.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And there's this really awesome book. I don't know if you read it. It's called Corazon de Dixie, by Julie Weiss, and she talks about Mexicans, um, particularly agricultural workers in the South. And there's this really awesome quote, and I know it's on point. She says that Mexicans and Mexican Americans in the South um, appeal more to the farm owners or their churches, instead of the federal government, Mexican and American, because the one thing that they learned back then was, if you don't cause any trouble or attract attention to yourself, then you just be protected from racism, and you won't become a target. But at the same time, the negative of that is that now we really have, we gave up our position to challenge authority at that point. And yes, and that's definitely true, because we were trying to make ourselves invisible and just not make any noise, then now it's difficult for us to challenge authority and to say, be outspoken about the different issues that we care about.
Yeah, it's amazing. So now you're doing U.F.W. work. It's
Yes.
kind of like, you know what I mean? I don't know if you feel it that way, but is it kind of full circle, but you're doing stuff in a different role now?
Yes. Well, it was really cool and interesting how it happened. So I always, most of my students didn't even know who Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta were. I would tell them about it and they'd be like, who? I don't know who that is. And I said, okay, it's important for me to teach you, and to make you aware of these different issues that we have going on. So during something that I developed at VSU that we didn't do in ABAC was, I started to celebrate the Farm Worker Awareness Week, which is 1 week in March that coincides with Cesar Chavez's birthday. And during that week, we do different activities in the VSU community to educate others about the farm worker issues. And my first year at VSU, well, my second year, I invited Arturo Rodriguez, which is the at the time he was the president of VSU. So he's the second president after Cesar Chavez.
Oh,
So I was very, very fortunate. I don't even remember how I got his information, but I connected with him.
nice.
And I remember I called his office and I spoke to his secretary, Areli. And, at first when I said, hey, I would love to have Arturo Rodriguez for this event. And she was very like, it's really busy, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, well, I direct the camp program. And then she was like, oh my God, I'm a camper. And then
Nice.
kind of connected that way. And then she's like, okay. So then she helped me and she made it work. So we had Arturo on our campus at VSU for a couple of days. And, he did an awesome event.
Nice.
And, the students, I could see it in the students to just have that figure, that is very well known, has done an extensive amount of work with farm workers all over the country. And anyway, so that's how I met Arturo. We became really good friends. He every so often he would text me, I would text him. And he would just be like, "Hey, I'm just checking on you. How are you? How are things
That's
going?"
great.
So we just kind of kept in touch that way. And when I left VSU, I contacted him and I said, "Hey, Arturo, I no longer work at VSU, but I wanted to talk to you about some ideas that I have on, how to, operate a nonprofit or a union and all these different things." And then before I knew it, I was speaking with his political director, and he, we started having that conversation with his staff, and then say, okay, Alma, we were not planning on doing this for a long time. We were planning on doing it, because we were actually in Georgia a couple of years ago after the death of a migrant worker. They got a heat stroke in the fields. And, we actually sent somebody there. And, we did some research and we realized that Georgia really needs help because there's currently no assistance for migrant farm workers. And I said, oh, definitely. I can tell you, just from experience and also from my students and from my parents, what is going on. So anyway, so he's like, we were planning on developing a United Farm Workers Foundation in Georgia. We were planning on doing it for maybe, 5 years, but you're available. So let's talk. And that's kind of sort of, how it started.
Nice.
So yes, so I now work for the U.F.W. And for me, it's an awesome opportunity to really do what I want to do, which is, advocate for farm workers.
Yeah.
Because we never had a Cesar Chavez or a Dolores Huerta figure here in the South. And just the U.F.W. name alone, is an incredible opportunity to bring to our community, to empower our farm workers, to, it's going to be a lot of work, but, to develop, to kind of sort of get out of that mentality of don't make any noise, don't do anything, and really learn how to challenge authority and, stand up for ourselves, because we really lost that. And even though I loved my work through the camp programs, it was too slow for me, getting to, 30 students at a time. We developed great relationships with the families, but even then I still, when they came up to me with different issues that the families were dealing with, like unfair pay, sexual assault, all these different things, I could definitely advocate for my students and provide them, different resources that could help them. But me myself, I was sort of tied to, there's a line that I can't cross.
Yeah.
And now, after leaving the university system, not being a state employee anymore, I can do a lot more.
Right.
So I love this, and I love the opportunity to, sort of become that figure, because my students already know me. In my 10 years of working in migrant education, I've already developed a relationship with the community. People know me, and it's not like the U.F.W. just picking up and coming here and say, okay, we're here.
Starting
Yeah,
from
we have no,
scratch.
Yeah, we have no idea what you're going through. We don't really know the people.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have any relationship with them, but I do.
Yeah.
So there's gonna be that trust,
Yeah.
hopefully, you
Well, and
know.
has it been your experience? Because I've lived all over the country. Each place is so different politically in some ways. Where I just remember moving to North Carolina, and Black folks there were so politicized, unlike anything I ever saw in Valdosta. They stood up in ways that I've never seen folks here. I don't mean to disrespect Black folks in Valdosta, but it has a different history, right? So, and living in New Mexico, the U.F.W, incredibly powerful,
Yes.
right? It's also minority majority state, versus a place like here where folks are really conservative, keep your head down.
Mhm.
Is that fair to say that it really does depend on where you're at?
Yes, yes, definitely. You know, in places like California, you know, I mean, they do have, you know, they develop that trust with the union to know that, you know, if they stand up for themselves, the union is going to be behind them and they're going to be supporting them. So, and they're not going to be alone. If, you know, here, I know that it's going to be a challenge, even though the population, you know, the farm working population knows me. I know that it's still going to be like, okay, yes, I trust you, but if I do what you tell me, or if I, you know, follow you and, you know, protest or whatever, you know, it's like, I don't know if you can guarantee that you won't help me if something bad happens.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I think it's gonna take some time. And, you know, it's really cool when you talk, you know, about politics, is that it was sort of like, you know, the stars aligned in a way, you know, because, you know, I left, you know, BSU. I started the work with the union, and you know, and we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do, and you know what the need is and exactly how we're going to approach it. But my first thought was, Georgia's a red state, you know, very conservative, very Republican. I know that in the 10 years that I've been doing this work, the Republican leaders don't, they haven't even made an attempt to help farm workers at all. In actually, they've actually developed policies against us.
Right.
So how am I going to make this work? You know, even with the union, even with the muscle, the name, you know, the funds, how
Yeah.
am I going to make
National
this work?
presence.
Yes. So then the election happened, and that was able to, you know, the union was awesome that they were able to connect me to the Biden campaign, because that was the one experience that I did not have. I didn't have any political experience because, you know, I've been uh, immersed in, you know, higher ed, and also, you know, the policies, as a state employee and all these different
Right.
things.
You can't endorse a candidate.
Yes. So anyway, so I got some experience that way, and you know, I worked for the Biden Latino team, and that was just incredible. But then even getting the updates, even knowing, you know, the information about, you know, we were gonna win Georgia, um, I would have never predicted that we would have been doing, you know, the Senate would have been, you know, Georgia being the battleground at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. I don't think anybody saw that coming.
No, so that was just perfect for me because, and you know, the work that I want to do, because, you know, I knew the Republican leaders didn't care. So this was an opportunity for me to develop those relationships with our, you know, now senators elects, and try to, you know, make them aware of the different issues that affect farm workers. And now I feel much better. It's still going to be a struggle, but now I feel much better about actually making an impact the way that I wanted to do it. And I've had the opportunity to meet with, you know, the OSAF campaign as well as the Warnock campaign, and that's where I learned, you know, that's Senator-elect Warnock, that his mom was, you know, pig cotton, and you know, the Senator-elect Ossoff, you know, his mom is an immigrant, and you know, they really did listen to us. And I mean, I know that our farm worker population and, you know, Latinx population, they were going to be more empowered, to actually, you know, stand up and know that they have people backing them up.
Yeah, it's been interesting. And it wasn't that long ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, where, state officials cracked down on illegal immigration
Mhm.
and then couldn't find anybody to work. Do you remember this? And
Yeah.
actually, we were trying to use folks that were on probation and parole. They sent them out to the fields, and folks walked off, literally walked off and said, "Put me back in jail. I am not doing this work." So it's, a lot of conservative Republican farmers got really pissed about that,
Mhm.
because it kind of backfired in a way.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever seen, I'm sure you've seen A Day Without a Mexican, the
Yes.
film? Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it's a real, right, it's a real telling film about this country's reliance on folks and who's a part of it and so on. But I guess the other question I have, given where we are, which has really been an anti-union place. I
Mhm.
mean, there's a way that conservative folk here paint everything that's collective as communist,
Mhm.
right? They call Dr. King a communist, right? They've called Warnock a communist, right? um, have you run into any of that as a representative of the U.F.W., like kind of this Red Scare stuff, that you're really spreading communism just by saying that workers should have rights, that workers should be paid fairly, that workers should work safely, that workers shouldn't die in the field?
No, not to my face, not to my face. We have been, doing different activities for the past couple of months, um, and really spreading the word about, the United Farm Workers, and really putting the flags with the Black Eagle out there. And, people kind of just give us that like, okay, who are you? Kind of that look. But no, I personally have not heard that yet. I know that as we get out there a little bit more and start, really doing work with the community and reaching out and, having more people being outspoken about it, I'm sure that that's going to
Yeah.
happen. I mean, it happens everywhere, but, I have heard, that, people think that Cesar Chavez, they call him a Marxist and all these different things.
Yeah.
So, I know it's gonna come. I know it's gonna get there. But yes, speaking to, what you were saying about, when they developed the policies of like anti-immigration in here in our state, I know that it really affected just all farmers, because even our program, it affected our programs because we were really struggling to recruit students, because the families were not coming here anymore. They were just skipping Georgia
Lean.
and going straight up.
Yeah.
So that really, and our students were moving somewhere else.
Well, most folks don't know that folks move with the food in a
Hmm.
lot of places. I know in California, folks go all the way up to Oregon and back down, right? I mean, is that fair to say?
Yes, yes, and that's, you call them streams.
Mm.
So we have streams of farm workers that, came from Florida and then went to Georgia and then went to South Carolina or North Carolina, or they went to Michigan. So, they follow these different streams up with the harvest. And some students were only, they were living in Georgia for many years. They never, they only moved in the summers or certain parts of the year. But after those policies were enacted, against farm workers, they're like, well, we already have, we already know people in another state. We already
The
go there every
connections.
summer. Yeah, we're just gonna move there and just start there. So yeah, so that really affected also our ability, when I was working with the C.A.M.P program, to serve those students, period, and to meet the goals of the program. Because the one thing about being grant funded is that if you don't meet your goals, then you could get defunded.
Right.
And that could have also really affected our ability to support this population of students. But luckily we made it work at the time, but it could have really, really hurt us.
Yeah. Are you finding that with agricultural workers that there are common struggles that are kind of patterns, or is it, I mean, is it really varied?
No, I mean they're pretty common for most of the farm workers here in Georgia and Florida as well.
Yeah.
Is because we do recruit students from Florida. Um, Definitely, one thing that we hear all the time, is if the parents, I mean, immigration, reform is, definitely a big one. Parents getting deported is something that we hear a lot, and every one of these things affect our ability to serve our students, because if a student, if their parents get deported, we can just say, okay, they're not going to finish the year. I mean, with reason, because, now at that point, they're going to be worried about their parents. They're going to be worried about, they may just drop out and go into Mexico with their parents. If they don't, then they have to worry about taking care of their siblings. Okay, I'm just going to drop out of college, go to work and support my siblings. Um, and just get them through, make sure they have food and all these different things.
And we're talking about people that this has been home for a lot of times. Is that fair to say that this is their country?
Yes. Oh yeah, they have the Southern accent and everything. I mean, they do.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, so that's one of the main issues. The other one is
when this gets into kind of DACA too, right? Whether
yes.
DACA would be extended or not.
Yes, and unfortunately for C.A.M.P, because it's a grant-funded program, we cannot support DACA students through it.
Really?
Or undocumented students.
Wow.
They had to be citizens or residents of the U.S., which, was one of the comments that always kind of like, okay, let me explain this again. Like when I was out recruiting, people would come up to us and be like, so, is it fair that, my child is a citizen, can't apply for, these scholarships and all these immigrants, with all these migrants? And I was like, okay, well, migrant is not synonymous of immigrant.
Yeah.
When we say migrant, do you work in agriculture? It's like, no. And I said, okay, if your child work in agriculture, they could totally qualify for the program. I would love to have more diversity. And, we would have that conversation, but I was like, so, I was able to educate some people that way, but yes, I mean, it was, I'm sorry.
It's a little ironic that those of us who are white want to debate who belongs on land that's stolen from other people.
Yes. Oh man, that's still happening. Yes.
I mean, most folks don't know how Troopville and Valdosta were created, that Creek people were here, that the land was literally dallied up after they had been killed in runoff in a lottery for white men to draw their name from and get the land that belonged to the people over here. But now we're going to tell you who's here, right?
Yes.
Who belongs here or not.
Well, technically, both of my ancestors were Native American, so yeah, I kind of have more right to this. But yeah, so we can support DACA students, and but yes, with the parents, if they're if they don't have a legal status, then I mean that really just puts them out. I mean that really just throws them out in the wolves for anybody to take advantage of them. Yeah. And we will see that all the time. Students came up to me and say, Ms. Alma, I have this project and I can't buy any supplies because my mom hasn't gotten paid because this person said they were going to pay her and they never paid her. So can you help me? Or, another situation, oh yeah, so this contractor, just ran off and we don't know what we're going to do. And do you know anybody that can help us with some food? Or, I mean, we hear that every single year from several students. And
I mean, we're talking about things that never really get resolved in terms of justice. Is that fair?
Yes. And I mean, and anything that affects their parents, it's going to affect them because then they can't focus. So for me, again, I mean, I in my position of camp director, I mean, I could help the students all day long, but when it came to their parents, I mean, my hands were pretty much tied and I could just try to find someone that could help. But that's another thing. There's no organizations at all in South Georgia to, that really focus on supporting farm workers. And that was something else that I was hoping to address through now my work in the U.F.W.
Yeah. Do you think farmers will push back, or has there been any pushback? Because again, we're talking about wages, we're talking about fairness, and there, I think most conservative folk don't think about why folks migrate to pick food, right? And why farmers use that labor instead of other labor. cheap, easily exploitable group of folks, right? Who again, oftentimes have no legal rights, or who do have legal rights are told to keep your head down, you know.
Yes, no, and and that's something that hasn't changed at all, because I mean, immigration issues definitely make the situation worse. But I don't know if you've seen this documentary. It's called Harvest of Shame. If you
I've
haven't
seen
seen
pieces of
it,
it, yeah.
yes, if you
Yeah.
haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour, and that's something, when I would get invited to different classes to teach at VSU and talk about this population, I would always show little clips of that documentary. But it's an amazing documentary, and this documentary was aired on, I think it was ABC or CBS, I forgot. But it was in 1960s Thanksgiving, and it was a huge. I mean, it was, for a major network to air a documentary about farm workers. I mean, it was a big
Big
deal.
deal, yeah.
And through this documentary was the reason why C.A.M.P and C.A.M.P were created. That was one of the positive things that came from this.
Yeah.
But anyway, so back then, it was only Black people and poor whites, working in the fields, and they were going through the exact same situation as now. People, farm owners, contractors taking advantage of them.
Yeah. My
Um,
family were sharecroppers, so I kind of know this
yeah,
story through them. My dad picked cotton as a kid as a
yes.
sharecropper.
Yes, and people taking advantage of them, not having a stable job, not having, decent housing, healthcare, all these different things, sleeping in a car, I mean, dying, that's still happening. So many of those issues, if you watch it, are still happening. It just the faces are different.
Yeah.
And now you add the immigration issue on top of it. I mean, it's worse, if when you really think about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, that has really never stopped, and I would
Yeah.
recommend it because the documentary focuses on the Eastern Stream. So
Okay.
they talk about Georgia, Florida. They talked about North Carolina and all these different areas.
Cool.
So
I'll find a link for it and put it in the description so
yeah.
folks can get it. Yeah, I also just think I've got friends that work in construction, and basically subcontract out to the same folks,
Mhm.
skilled laborers, right?
Mhm.
From Mexico, Central and South America. And the stories they've told me about people being killed on the job, and a variety of kind of construction related accidents and what happens when that happens. I know we have a U.F.W, but there might be a need for a U.C.W, right? United Construction Worker. You know what I mean? Like this just isn't an agricultural worker issue. Folks are doing all kinds of jobs. And again, it amazes me how little a lot of us know about that, you
Mhm.
know.
Yes, and I mean, it's when you really think about it, this is something that I tell my students, or that I would tell my students is, when you really think about it, the Mexican or, some of the Latino values are very, very conservative. So,
Absolutely.
and it really fit perfectly with the Republican values,
Yeah.
which is, probably the
It
reason.
seems like you're sending a message to the Republican Party here.
Well,
And other people have, right? I mean, it's not a new message, right?
yes, yes.
You know,
But at the same time, we just slightly hopeful
yeah,
that because, we relate in so many things, they will overlook,
yeah,
the racial part of it. And maybe, they would treat us as one of them. That's not gonna happen. That's
yeah.
not.
Well, I think this kind of leads me into something we haven't mentioned too, is what qualifies as Latino and Latina is very complicated in the US, right? So when Republicans came, they're getting the Latino vote, they're getting the Cuban vote.
Yes, yes,
You know what I mean? Well, even I saw a picture of you had a shirt that said educated Chicana. Like
yes,
Chicana is not Latina, right? Is not Mexicana. It is not Hispanic, right? Like, and most folks lump this incredibly diverse group of folks into one category as if they're all the same. Politicians talk about them as if they're all the same, right?
Yes,
You
yes.
know,
And yes, and that's something that I also encourage my students to do. We talk about identity, and I said, I consider myself a Chicana. I use the terminology. I say Hispanic. In Latino, I use it in different ways depending on what I'm working on.
yeah,
So if I'm writing a grant, I'm using the language that they're using. If I'm talking to
that
a
they
different
want to, right?
yes. So, if I'm, talking about, to a Mexican group, then I say, Mexican. So, I mean, but I tell them, so what is your identity?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, it's like, what do you call yourself? And it's like, oh, well, Mexican. And I was like, well, not everybody in this room is Mexican.
Right, right,
Like, so what do you call yourself? And I said, whatever you want it to be, whatever you feel your identity is, that's what you call yourself.
right.
And, I call myself Chicana, and now I do. And, I had a mentor that had a problem with that.
Really?
you know, they're like, that's, Chicana, that's controversial. That's what people in California use. That's what, those radicals and blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, that also comes with that old mentality, that's older Latinos.
Yeah.
Um,
That are conservative.
yes, very conservative. And they have problems with terminology like that. So when I could do my own thing, really me going to BSU,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to do whatever I want. So then I finally started, calling myself a Chicana. And yeah, that's what I consider myself. But really, it's definitely problematic that a lot of politicians definitely put us in the same group
Yeah.
when we are very, very different. So yeah.
Yeah, it's when it gets complicated, right? Because, white supremacy permeates folks of color too, right? You get the kind of colorism thing.
Oh my God.
I've had, Latinas in my life. It's painful to think about it, right? How it divides folks and it also undermines movement, for change. But we won't go down that road, but it's a really fascinating, complicated reality.
Yeah, and I see that a lot with my students, and I have to point it out. When they start making jokes about somebody else's color skin, and I said, all right,
Being
that's
darker or lighter.
yes,
Yeah.
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 And I have to address it as well, and I talk about it in class because they have no idea,
Yeah.
and we
And we're
have
talking within one
within
ethnic
Latino,
group.
yes.
Yeah. Like I just want to make sure people don't hear that as, Latino folks are being racist against. We're
Oh, no,
talking
no,
about the
no,
struggling, right?
no, it's within each other. Yeah, because I forgot to mention the class that I would teach was only to camp students.
Yeah.
So I could really just speak to them, at their level, and we would have conversations about, colorism, and they will make comments about each other's skin. And, students would tell me stories about how their parents, would tell them to not date somebody that was darker than them,
Yeah.
and
Even
things
in
like
their own group.
even when in their own group, yes.
Yeah.
And obviously, white supremacy is something that is deeply rooted
And
everywhere,
all
not
of us,
just in the
all
US.
of us.
I
Yeah.
mean, all over South America.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the soap operas, Mexican soap operas,
Yeah.
you see the main
Yeah.
character, blue-eyed blonde.
Yeah. Univision, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Like,
I would have been the maid in a Mexican soap opera.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, and I work very hard to, definitely try to change this, but I'm sure that some of the opportunities that I've received were based from colorism because I'm not the typical Mexican dark skinned, person. And, I mean, I hate to say this, but that's what I see around me, that those people, those Mexican Latinos, whatever you want to call them, if you're light skinned, you will definitely have more opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember being out. Can I tell you a story real quick?
Yes.
I remember being at a martini bar by the college in New Mexico with a Chicana friend, and this drunk white guy stumbles over to her and starts questioning her about what she is. And she looks him in the eye and says, "I'm a human." And he goes, "No, no, no. What, like, where are you from? Where are your people from?" And she goes, "My people are from Texas." And he goes, "No, no, no, no. Like, where are they really from? Like, where, where are they back in the day?" And she looked at him. She goes, "My people were in Texas when it was Mexico. Where are you from and what are you?"
Yes.
So
Oh my
this,
God.
I mean, that the power in a total stranger coming up and interrogating somebody. Well, at first they're not a person, right? It's what are you,
Hmm.
right? But like the power and the arrogance of that. I mean, she just schooled this dude. It was something to see, but it was also painful to know that she walked around in the world where that happens to her all the time.
Oh yes, I get that like twice or thrice a year.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes. And I was like, okay, so actually not too long ago. Actually, I got that about a month ago.
really.
No, yeah. Somebody said, I was like, oh, so where are you from? I was like, okay, there's the
Yeah.
microaggressions again.
Yeah, and the message is you're suspect, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're
Hmm.
kind of watching you kind of
Yes.
thing. So,
Yep.
so you worked on the Biden camp. Can I just ask, because I wasn't a big fan of Biden, not to poo-poo on any of that, right? I didn't vote for him. I didn't vote for Donald Trump either, but um, if you had your choice of presidential candidates, would he have been your choice? Can you say?
Bernie all the
Yeah, well,
way.
yeah. Well, and this is my thing with the DNC. They threw Bernie under the bus again.
Yes.
I mean, can we agree on that?
Yes. Yes.
The
Yes.
DNC doesn't want that kind of change.
No,
The
no.
DNC is a corporation, right? And I
Yeah.
get the worst of evils argument, right? But I'm almost 60, and I'm told every cycle to choose one of the evils,
Yes.
and I'm told every cycle the whole time,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
but
No, I did not vote for him in the primaries. I did vote for him on, November, was it 3rd?
third, yeah.
Um, and, I did work very hard for his campaign. But, that's something that, yeah, I mean, the lesser of two evils, and it wasn't, I mean, it was a great experience. I learned a lot. I'm glad that he was able to win, or get Trump out of office. But no, he was not my first choice.
Yeah, yeah. So Georgia goes blue, right? The other thing I just keep thinking about, and I've talked to a couple other folks on podcast about this, is that at the state level, we're still pretty red, right? The state house is still controlled by Republicans. And it's very clear to me that they are already scrambling on how to undo the mobilization that happened this last time. I was listening to conservative talk radio this morning, and the person who said this is our mayor. He kind of intimated that the paying people to go canvas was kind of like buying votes,
Hmm.
So I'm going to approach him about that comment because it troubles me. But it's very clear. I always have to, my conservative family members, I often wonder, do you really believe in democracy? Do you really, this argument that you make voting hard, right? In a time where I can bank online, I can do my taxes online, security, right? What does it mean that we want to make voting hard? Is that, and there's a legacy of excluding people by making voting hard, right? So, um, it, even though we've seen a kind of a mini blue wave in Georgia, I'm terrified, to tell you the truth, especially after last week,
Yes.
about our future. And I'm just kind of wondering where you and other folks that worked on the campaigns are and how you're feeling, and
Well,
especially where we live, right?
yes. Well, I mean, I can tell you that, most of the mobilization as far as, the campaign. I mean, their efforts were really focused in the Atlanta area.
Yeah.
And, there were a lot of people that were, hired to go canvas.
I would say on both sides. There was so much money came in on both sides, right?
Yes.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
definitely. Yeah, no, and yes, I mean, and some of my friends even, work for the campaign to be, like community organizers, to basically just, reach out to their family and friends, which, I mean, I think it goes back to the whole, I guess, the culture of the South is like, you don't cause any trouble, don't, speak up, just keep it to yourselves, and I mean, I think maybe being paid did empower them a little bit more to actually do what they were planning on doing or thinking about doing anyway. That was just, I was like, oh, okay, if I can make some extra cash, so sure.
Well, let's be sure, like they weren't paid for their vote. Canvassers were paid
Yes,
to go out and mobilize people,
yes,
see what, get folks registered or get people to the
yes,
polls. They
yes.
didn't buy votes, right?
No, not at all. And they were already, I mean, and most of my friends that work for the campaign, they were already doing those things anyway. They were already, reaching out and posting things about, the candidates. But when they found out, they're like, oh, I can actually get paid for this. I was like, oh, so yeah, let me try it out. But no, I mean, and I did the same thing. I mean, I was working for the U.F.W. and, the U.F.W., does political work. So I was out there, I did it all. I did, Canvas, phone bank. I was fortunate enough to also be invited to speak at rallies. So yes, I mean, there was, but, like I was, going back to my initial comment is, most of the efforts were focused in the Atlanta area. That is really heavily populated. They see it, especially for the Latino population. They see it, there's a bigger concentration of Latinos in like when it, yes, here in the South, we were canvassing and it was a lot of work to reach out to them. And even when we did reach out to them, we did run into a lot of, Republican Latinos. And, there was this one gentleman I met, and that just sort of opened my eyes because I never heard that before. We got to his house and, as we were knocking, he pulled up in his truck and, he had, the typical like farmer, just look at him in persona. And he was a little bit older. And we said, hey, we just here, we're reaching out, blah, blah, blah. And I said, are you voting? And, we gave him some, like a little flyer, and it had the Democratic candidates, Ossoff and Warnock on it. And he said, well, it's like, I'm not voting this year. And we said, oh, it's like, we were having a conversation. It's like, oh, why? And he said, well, I'm a Republican. I'm a Republican. And this president that we have, he's just terrible. And I just rather not vote. He said, I came to the US, I was able to become, a legal resident through the policies that Donald Reagan, no, what's his name?
Ronald Reagan?
Ronald, yes. The Ronald Reagan.
1980s.
Yes, the Ronald Reagan put in place. So because of him as a Republican, I was able to become a legal citizen. So I've been supporting Republicans ever since. And then, we had that conversation. I said, well, do you feel Republicans now are the same Republicans as
1980
back in the 80s? And he said, well,
you can say the same thing for the Democrats too, I would say.
Exactly. And I said, well, and then we just had a great conversation. And, I mean, I wasn't trying to convince them or anything, but, it was something to think about, because I mean, at the end of the day, if like me, I have my mind made up. Nobody can tell me anything. I mean, I'll listen,
Yeah.
And then maybe, depending on, once I start thinking about it, I may change my mind. So, we just kind of left them with that. But yeah, I mean, I had no idea that, the Ronald Reagan policies were the reason why a lot of
Yeah.
Latinos in the US
Even
were.
Richard Nixon had some pretty liberal policies. I mean, I think this is, as an old guy, the Democratic Party has gone so far right. We even saw it with when Hillary ran, how Bernie's presence had pushed her left.
Mhm.
She wasn't talking about a variety of, and Black Lives Matter pushed her left by showing up at fundraisers too.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter pushed Bernie too, right? But yeah, the Democratic Party of today, including Barack Obama, no disrespect, is like moderate republicanism, of the 70s of my life. It's sad and kind of scary in a way.
Yes, yes. And, and that's the one thing said, it's the main thing that we hear. It's like, well, actually he told me that. He's like, well, Obama had more policies against immigrants and all these
And
things. I said,
deported
yes,
more than George Bush.
yes. And I said,
Yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
definitely.
And we
And
won't go into drones, and we won't go into a variety of other issues. It's heartbreaking. I think we also have to be honest about it, though.
mhm.
So given where we are as a nation, I mean, and given the events of last week when the Capitol was overrun by insurrectionists, I mean, how are you feeling after? I mean, so much has happened. I don't think our minds and hearts, mine hasn't gotten around everything in this moment, and it's continuing. But I'm
Mhm.
just kind of wondering where you're at and what your thoughts are about the future, about what might happen.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's been, I mean, I think I'm in a better place now, but, unfortunately, I've been, in my professional career, I've experienced, racism. And, I felt for a while, even before the pandemic hit, that I was already isolated, because of the racism that I was experiencing. People just sort of just, pushed me to the side when I became a little bit more outspoken about things that were going on. Um, and, again, same for, racism. I've been experienced racism before, the whole Black Lives Matter movement. So by that point, I was already like, like really, really close to giving up, because this is not going to get better. And now, going through the election, slowly, just um, getting back to myself, because I've always been, somebody that, likes to be the example, because we need that. And I know the students are watching me, um, you know, fights for what's right. And, I'm definitely outspoken, and, I like to get other people to become involved in all these different things. But anyway, so once I started getting back to that, through the campaign work, and through the U.F.W, and they also helped me with that. Winning the presidency, then winning the Senate, and what should have been a day where we're like celebrating and thinking about all these awesome things that are happening, then we hear about what's going on in DC. And to be honest, I'm not surprised, I mean, at all, because I can't fake anything. I mean, if I'm not, if I don't agree with something, I'm going to speak out about it. um so I have to say that, unfortunately, there were friends and family members that I've cut ties with because of their views and the support for Donald Trump. And I know that they were definitely complicit in what has transpired, in the past week or so.
Yeah, and still transpiring.
Yes,
You know.
and it's after that happened on last Tuesday, it was, I had a lot of people reaching out, just especially because I've been very visible in this whole, this whole election thing. reaching out to me, telling me to be careful.
Mm.
And, I mean, it's, unfortunately, as a immigrant, as a woman, a farm worker, um, I've been through some very, very bad experiences in my life that I've overcome. And, I mean, I think at this point, I don't think there's anything anybody can do to me that, will scare me in a way. And I have to tell you my experience about my first rally ever later. But anyway, so I mean, I was like, yeah, I mean, I'm gonna keep doing my thing. That's what they want. They want to intimidate us into,
Right.
not being more outspoken. Um, and that's something that I see. Even through this election work. I remember reaching out to some of my Latino colleagues and say, hey, do you want a banner for your, like a yard sign, for to show your support for the candidates? And they'll be like, I don't want to become a target. So no, thank you. I
Yeah.
was like, I mean, I'll take it, but I just put it in my house and just keep it as a memento, but I'm not putting it in my yard.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, my house is surrounded, I was surrounded by yard signs. And
Yeah.
I was,
Me
I
too.
mean, and to be honest, I was waiting. I was waiting for somebody to do or say something.
Yeah.
And it never happened. But, that's definitely a worry that a lot of my colleagues and friends, they're like, be careful, be careful. And I was like, well, I mean, I think I've always been, but, you know, um, I'm not gonna, I don't want to be a fatalist and be like, well, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, but it's, I think it's definitely a tactic that, they know works because they've been using, fear as a way to keep us from moving
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that's something that I don't do well with. It usually pushes me to do more.
Yeah. Me too.
So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on that whole thing.
Gotcha. So tell me about the rally. If you,
Oh, yes.
yeah.
So not many people know this. I've been, there's a lot of experiences from me when I was a child. They just kind of like when I'm when I experience that again, it's just like, oh my God, I forgot that happened. It's just, the trauma, I guess, like keeping myself safe.
Yeah.
So at the All South rally, I was speaking, and then
And
I
that's,
was
is that here? Yeah.
yes, it was in Valdosta.
Okay.
I was speaking, and when I got off, I was like, oh yes, okay. So when I was little, I cannot remember how old I was. I think I was like 8, maybe. My mom was extremely involved in politics in Mexico. Unfortunately, this is something that I have experience with through the Mexican government is extremely corrupt.
Hmm.
It always has been, seems like. I mean, I don't ever remember it being like a good government that truly cares about the people. It's always
Yeah.
very corrupt with, the politicians, it's all about money. So that's something I grew up with. Anyway, so my mom has, that's something that I find myself as I get older. It's like, oh my God, I'm my mom. Because
We
my
all,
mom,
yeah.
my
We all,
mom was so involved in everything. And I remember she dragged us, because she had no babysitter or anything. So, me and my siblings, we're all 1 year apart. She took us to a political rally. And, we're just kind of standing there, we're just watching. And, we're looking at somebody on stage. And then we hear gunshots. And then, whoever's on stage, they just start running and, drop to the ground. And I remember everybody in the crowd just scatters.
wow.
So we're all just running. And then my mom found some house and we just kind of hid in their yard. And then, whoever, owned the house, they just came outside and they're like, trying to talk to my mom about what happened. And she's just like hyperventilating, just like trying to say, what was going on. And the lady running into the house, and bringing back some water with sugar. I don't know what that does. But, she gave it to my mom and she was drinking it. She was like, I remember like shaking like her hands with a cup. And next week we were back at a rally again.
Wow.
And I remember some of the people that were speaking in the one from the week before. Like I remember they had like scratches on their faces and all these different things. But yeah, like I actually experienced in my first political rally ever. I experienced an assassination.
Gotcha.
So
Wow.
yes.
Wow.
Yes. So, again, like I was telling you, that through my life, I've experienced a lot of traumatic experiences that now I'm just like, yeah, if it happens again, I've been through it. I'm sure I'm going to be okay.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yes.
Is there anything we should talk about that we haven't?
I don't
Or do you have
know.
any questions or anything?
Um, yeah. So, I'm curious about your podcast. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes.
Well,
So,
I have been reaching out to conservative talk show hosts locally because I'm really weary of being called a communist, an American, a socialist. I've been called evil, and not me personally, but people like me. So anybody who's not a conservative is a threat. So, and my parents were military, so we lived all over the place, but I grew up here really more than 45 years. So this is home. Um, and the thing I've been realizing lately is how much there is this climate of fear and terror here all the time for anything that's not conservative. It was here
mhm,
when I was a kid, even as a white person. If you weren't in line with the dominant group, you not only were going to feel alone, but I think you also have to war against, is there something wrong with me?
yes.
Right. And so I've been doing that, and places like here run off people.
Hmm.
People leave, but we run off some people because it's so oppressive. At times it's dangerous, all in the name of Jesus and love. I mean, there's all this crazy hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I came back after being in the most progressive city in the country and seeing kind of progressive racism and the problems it has, and it wasn't going to be of any use there, I just came home. So I've reached out. That's all to say, I've reached out to folks who have a microphone for almost 15 hours a week, who have on guests that just say the most outlandish things.
Mhm.
And I think the political division is fueled by one-sided media. I think it's very lucrative. I just read a great book on this called Hating Incorporated by Matt Taibbi. But so in a kind of good faith effort, I reached out to these folks and said, look, you're saying things and your guests are saying things that are ludicrous. For example, one person had a guest post on that said Antifa was an arm of the Democratic Party. One guest said that all these folks in BLM are making millions and millions of dollars, just ludicrous stuff. And so I wrote and I said, look, when I taught in Portland, I had students that were in Antifa, and I can tell you about them, and I can tell you how I challenged them. I have students, and I've participated in BLM events, including don't shoot events and a variety of things. So I made it pretty clear that, and again, that not to attack, but let's have a conversation about these claims you're making. And so I've reached out to 6 different people, and no one would take me up on it, including our mayor.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I thought, well, maybe, and not only that, we need a format to have a conversation. I don't think the world needs another white guy with a podcast, but given this technology, like I wanted to do 2 things. I want to try to have conversations with conservatives. I'm talking to an evangelical conservative Christian later this afternoon. So I want to have, conversations across difference, but I also want folks to see different perspectives that will never make it on the air here or in the
Yeah.
newspaper at times.
Yeah.
So it seems like we have this technology. Why not do it and have these conversations? It could be public.
Mhm.
Um, so there's some accountability for them.
Yes.
But so that's all. And I have
Yes.
no idea what I'm doing. I really don't.
Me too. It's okay.
I mean, I think that's what I don't pretend to have any answers or, and my political views are very left. And the irony, for my conservative brothers and sisters is, I still consider myself a follower of Jesus in the radical sense. I think Jesus was a radical. I
Yes.
think Cesar Chavez said the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That kind of almost liberation theology.
Hmm.
So I want to have conversations about the differences in what we mean by Christian, because I think the work you do, I think social justice work at its best, not when it's like self-righteous and woke for the sake of wokeness, right? Which is really about people's egos most of the time, right?
Yes.
But that is the message of Jesus.
Yes. Yeah. And I found that that's something that I found, people doing, work, with the forum.
Don't you hate to even call it work though? Like that works. But go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yes, no, yeah, people doing, like, oh, let's help this poor undocumented, let's help these poor migrants. And, and it was hilarious. And, surprisingly, I would find that even more extreme the more educated the people
Mhm.
were. For example, I mean, yes, I experienced that as a farm worker. Yes, I experienced that, as a college student. Yes, at a 2-year community college. But, at BSU, that was the time where I saw that, where people supposedly, the people that were trying to
Yeah.
help us were the people that were the most, like, they would challenge me, the person that we're trying to help for the sake of their own, I guess, jobs, or their own reputation. Like, I've actually had somebody tell me, it's like, oh, no, I know the undocumented people because my research has told me. And I'm like,
I know those people. I might have been one of those people at one time too. I don't know, but yeah.
And I was like, all right, I'm done with you.
Yeah. So you have folks educating you about your own experience.
Yes. Oh, yes, all the time, because the research said.
Yeah.
And I actually had a person tell me, there was an event that we did at ABSU. It was called the Bandana Project, and this is an event that we incorporated to our Farm Worker Awareness Week events. That is supposed to bring awareness to women that have been sexually assaulted in the fields.
Yeah.
And I had somebody from a department telling us, calling very angry after we announced it, that was their thing, and they did it 7 years ago, and they were just about to do it. So if we wanted to collaborate with them, then we could, but it was their thing. And I'm like, okay, so you're telling an actual woman that has been assaulted in the fields not to do this activity because it's your thing? And I didn't appreciate that very much, and I had somebody close to tears. But
that's the next thing that usually happens, right?
But yes, and I mean, it's it's funny. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what I meant when we were talking before we started recording. Like, I've gone fishing with folks that were probably in the Klan, well, not in the same boat, but we were on the same pond. And we'd start talking, and I could talk to them about race and kind of their racial views, and they would agree with me by the people they hate aren't the ones stepping on them. Right. It doesn't take long for them to figure out, if you ask some folks some questions. The PhDs and the white liberals in my life, the conversation's almost impossible.
Oh, yes.
Yes. And that's deeply, and those folks have institutional power in the way my guy that works at a factory goes fishing just does not. So that's what I call it, progressive racism. Like, that's a tough one. I know, but like, it's a tough one as a white PhD talking to, you know what I mean? Like, white male PhD.
Yes.
Yes. Well.
Yeah. So I was like, I found that very annoying.
Yeah. At Portland one time, I remember walking across the quad, and the white students were lecturing an older Black campus police officer about white privilege.
Yeah, there's a lot of white saviors, unfortunately, on college campuses. And speaking with my colleagues, I think the bigger or more elite the university is, the more you find them. And Yeah, it was a little annoying, but nothing I couldn't address.
Yeah, it fascinates me how we can remake supremacy as we say we're fighting against supremacy.
Hmm. Yeah, and no, I mean, I think I think those are the people that are the most dangerous, to be honest.
Me too. Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. They have way more power than the average working class person. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
anything else?
Um, Let me think. No, I think that's it. I mean, I have a ton of stories, so if you ever want to come back and do this,
Yeah, we can do it again. It'd be great to hear them and to document them too, and I just really appreciate, you didn't know me from Adam, so I appreciate you trusting me enough to to talk with me today and let me record it and us have a conversation. And also just thank you for what you shared. I think people need to hear it.
hmm.
I think something you said so important, and I've had this happen in my life too. Like when I find out that somebody's gone through something that I've gone through, it changes it. Like you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden, oh, it's not just me. There's something larger happening that's happening to other people too. And that's, yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
No, and I was gonna say, I mean, and I think that's why this whole polite, conservative, just keep things to yourself, culture here in the South, makes things more difficult, is because we don't talk about our experiences, especially the bad ones,
Yes.
and we think we're the only ones going through it. And like I that's the one thing that I really encouraged with my students, and they've mentioned that as well, is that I'm not, I have no shame, or I'm afraid of, really being honest about things that I've experienced,
Yeah.
being vulnerable and, with them. And, that's when they become a little bit more empowered to say, okay, well, if she's been through it, they see me as this, successful person and, somebody that made it. It's like, no, until you guys make it, like, I don't think I've made it. But anyway, so yes, they see me as this person. They're like, oh, she went through that. And then after that, they come back and, they tell me their stories. And I was like, well, I'm sorry, you went through those things, but, you're not alone. And, we have those
Right.
conversations, and, and then we can see that we actually have more in common. And I think that's also encourages them to um to be more also outspoken, and to fight for
Yeah.
whatever they think is right, whatever cause that is.
Yeah. Kind of find their voice.
Yeah.
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 Makes perfect sense. Well, Alma, thank you so much.
Yes.
If you can hang out, I'll stop the recording and we can
Okay.
chat for a minute and then wrap things up. But thank you again. It's been a privilege. I've enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the work you did on the campaign and all the other folks that really got out there and made history. Really,
Yeah.
uh,
It's,
it's again. I don't think I certainly haven't. It hasn't sunk in what it means yet to me. So, yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, thank
Thank
you.
you for having me.